Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us again to talk about accessory dwellings. We have a relatively straightforward agenda today. Hopefully you all are seeing my screen. I just wanted to start by introducing myself. Again, I'm Hannah Hibley. I'm the Long Range Planning Division Manager at Boulder County Community Planning and Permitting. Also on the call as staff today with us is Ethan Abner and Andrea Vaughn, also members of the Planning and Policy team here at Community Planning and Permitting. And Dale Case, the director, and Denise Grimm from staff are also here with us today. I intend to go through the draft regulations that were posted to the website today. I anticipate that might take about an hour, after which we'll do a question and answer session. So if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A. Our goal here really today is to talk through the draft and hope to give you a good understanding of what's in there so that you can provide comments based on an understanding of what's being proposed. This meeting is recorded and will also be posted on the website along with the draft staff regulations. Okay, so at the last meeting, we talked about what are accessory dwellings and talked about the fact that there are multiple definitions of those. And for our purposes, for this code update, we needed to craft our own definition. So this is what's in the proposed draft. It's a dwelling unit which is subordinate in size and use, auxiliary to the principal single family dwelling. So the pictures here show you a couple of examples. It could be attached, it could be detached. We're going to get into that more further along. But this is the base definition that we're using to describe what these are. As far as applicability, the draft includes that a single accessory dwelling may be constructed as part of the post-fire redevelopment of a property when the principal single family dwelling was destroyed by the fire. And I'm just going to pause here and let you know that these slides are heavily text intensive because they are the text that's in the code. So you'll see that alignment between what we're talking about here and the slides in the draft regulations if you choose to download those from the website. So not a lot of exciting pictures in this presentation. The code then moves on to talk about the parameters, so the requirements for these. It does propose a size limit of up to 700 square feet. This ensures that the dwelling is subordinate to the primary use. It reduces the potential for these to have impacts on the land, the landscape, and perhaps adjacent neighbors. And reducing this potential for development impacts allows us to reduce the need for an intensive land use review process. The smaller size aligns with the comprehensive plan goals of supporting accessory dwellings in a way that has limited impacts on the county's natural resources and transportation infrastructure. So keeping them smaller allows them to fit in more easily. The floor area of these dwellings are contemplated to be considered residential floor area and shall fit within the size allowance provided in F1A. Again, I apologize for the text reference to a previous section of Article 19. But what this means in essence is that the decision to build an accessory dwelling is not proposed to grant any additional allowance for new development above that which is already allowed under Article 19. So if you recall, the Marshall Fire provisions granted an additional 1,000 square feet or up to the size presumed to be compatible with the neighborhood. This allows these accessory dwellings, again, to fit within the character of the neighborhoods and to not contribute to that changing dramatically. And if the accessory dwellings are already part of that floor area that we contemplated when we were adopting Article 19. They're less likely to have any significant impact beyond what was already contemplated and was already adopted. Primary dwelling, short-term rentals, secondary short-term rentals, and vacation rentals shall not be permitted on properties with an accessory dwelling. Accessory dwellings in the comprehensive plan are looked at as a strategy to help address the local housing crisis. We've heard this from the community as well, that there's a housing need, and this is why folks are interested in these. It does help assure that the accessory dwellings and the properties they're constructed on remain compatible with the neighborhoods. And as I mentioned, preserves housing for residents. The accessory dwelling shall use the same access point and driveway as the principal residence. Again, this maintains the character of the neighborhood as a single family neighborhood. In addition to the fact that new driveways create new impacts on the land, on the landscape, and on the roadway networks that we would really need to look at on a more detailed basis than what we're proposing in the draft at this time. The code requirements do include that one on-site parking space be provided. There are some areas where these would be allowed, where the lots are quite small, and the parking demands for additional residents could create issues in the neighborhood. Realizing that this is less of an issue on larger lots, but still that one on-site parking space is to be required. And since the accessory dwellings are proposed to be small, we believe that the one parking space should be sufficient without being onerous. The accessory dwelling shall remain in common ownership with the property, and accessory dwelling shall not result in the creation of additional building lots, nor result in the change of the property to condominium ownership. Again, the intent behind these accessory dwellings is they fit in and become part of the neighborhood. It's not intended to drive new subdivision or create new separate building lots that would then have a whole set of development rights and opportunities that go along with that. In addition, it's also not intended to create additional ownership entities where kind of that condominium ownership can have long-term coordination of utility provision and shared maintenance matters, which can be problematic. So we did hear that some folks were interested in constructing the accessory dwelling prior to their principal dwelling as a means to help them get home and back to their property. This code requirement here just clarifies the fact that at some point in time, if the principal dwelling is never constructed, sort of by default, the accessory dwelling would become the principal dwelling. So in these instances where the accessory dwelling is constructed prior to the principal dwelling, a complete building permit application for the principal dwelling must be submitted by March 29th, 2027. After this date, the accessory dwelling would then be considered the principal dwelling in use on the property. There is a one-time extension of up to a year that might be granted. So this provision really clarifies when the accessory dwelling would be converted to be considered the principal dwelling. And that date aligns with the sunset date of Article 19 in general. After this time, the regular provisions of the land use code would apply. The code then moves into a section called special provisions by accessory dwelling type, and it defines 3 types of accessory dwellings and establishes different parameters for each type and different review processes. And this is in recognition of the fact that these different types have the potential to have different levels of impact, and those that are less likely to have impact maybe don't need the same level of review as those that might. So the first definition is for a detached accessory dwelling. So this is a standalone separate dwelling. It's separate from the principal dwelling or separate from any other accessory structure. Since the homes that were destroyed wouldn't have had these on the property previously, they are new development on the property, and they have the potential to have the most new and different impacts than we had previously contemplated when we drafted the regulations of Article 19. I'm going to go through all the definitions first, and then we'll come back and talk about the different provisions for each type. So the other type described is where the accessory dwelling is attached to an accessory structure. So the dwelling would share either a wall or a floor with a detached accessory structure. We used these pictures previously in our presentation, but on the one side it shares a floor, and on the other side it shares a wall. So it might be above or beside whatever the accessory structure is. This example here is a detached garage, but it's not limited to a detached garage. It could be your workshop or your garden house or any of those other types of accessory structures that you had in our rebuilding. So these could be either new or replacement structures. So perhaps you had a detached garage that was destroyed and you're rebuilding a detached garage. So that's a replacement structure. Perhaps you didn't have a detached garage and you now are planning to build one. We would consider that a new accessory structure. And again, the new ones, you know, if you're adding a new structure to the site, again, have similar potential to a detached structure to have new and different impacts than maybe was previously contemplated or existed previously on the site as well. So the third type defined is when they're attached to the principal structure. So again, it's designed as part of the primary residence. It might share a wall or a floor with the rest of the structure. There are a couple of permutations shown here in the slide. It could be attached to an exterior wall. This could be your basement apartment or your attic apartment. In an iteration where the principal structure also had an attached garage, maybe it's over the attached garage, that would fall into this category as well. And we think these really have the least potential to result in new and different impacts than we previously contemplated when we drafted Article 19. So the various levels of potential impact play into the additional provisions associated with each type. So for a detached structure, you know, these are new on the landscape, there is a height limit of 20 feet. And a site plan review waiver is also proposed to be required. We would look at those for the limited purpose of looking at the structure's location and its potential impact. On some sites, you know, it's not realistic to think that, you know, this new detached structure might be located anywhere but really clustered with the house. But on larger parcels, that is possible. So depending on where someone wanted to put it, we would look at it through site plan review waiver, or if it's clustered with the house and located within 50 feet of the footprint of the single family dwelling that was destroyed by the fire, site plan review waiver is not required. So site plan review would be required if you're building a new detached structure that's further than 50 feet away from the house that was destroyed. Our typical site plan review waiver process has appeals converted to a full site plan review waiver process. And so this last point here is just to clarify that the appeal process for the determination letter that would come out of this site plan review would go directly to the Board of County Commissioners. Kind of shortens that appeal process if necessary. So back to the attached accessory structure and its additional provisions. So if you're rebuilding a detached accessory structure and it includes an accessory dwelling, it shall comply with the location requirements of section F above. And again, I apologize for the code reference. That doesn't kind of make a lot of sense if we're reading it like we are right now. But section F is the location requirements that apply to the construction of your house. So it's the need to reuse a certain percentage of the footprint. So if you're rebuilding an accessory structure that you had, it's generally in the same location as it's already required to be under Article 19. But you're adding the accessory dwelling to that. You just need to comply with those location requirements. There's no additional review needed. If you're building a new structure, again, you didn't have an accessory building before and you're proposing a new one and you want it to have an accessory dwelling. Again, we're proposing the site plan review waiver process to review that new location unless you choose to cluster the new structure with the pre-existing development. And we have the same appeal process for the waiver. Okay, so the attached to the principal structure, if you recall in my slide before, I kind of noted this is the one that we think has the least potential to have different impacts than the house that can already be rebuilt. So really the rebuilding of a principal structure that includes the accessory dwelling, again, just needs to comply with the location requirements that are spelled out in Article 19 already. So there's not a planning review for these. Okay, I had given us an hour to review all that. I don't clearly, my walking through it didn't take that amount of time, so we'll have more time for Q&A, but I did want to stop and talk about next steps. Again, part of the reason that we really wanted to do this with you today is because our referral period starts today. I have a little bit of I have a typo there. I see now it should be 6/16 to 6/28. So we're hoping that you have a good understanding of these as they're currently written so that you can, in your comment, provide feedback to us about what you think works, what doesn't work, how would you change it. And that comment period again runs until Tuesday the 28th. Planning Commission is anticipated in July. This is a public hearing, so I just wanted to let you know that's another opportunity for comment to Planning Commission. And they make a recommendation on the draft regulations to the Board of County Commissioners. We tentatively have that Board of County Commissioners hearing set for August 4th. And again, this is another public hearing with public comment opportunity. And our Board of County Commissioners is our decision-making body. So really none of these regulations are completely final until the board has made a decision. So we can move into our Q&A at this time. I just do want to ask that we try and keep the questions related to kind of what we've looked at here today, really focused on the proposed regulations. If you don't understand something, if you have questions about how something might work. But if you do have questions about your property and your particular situation, we're not really able to answer those in this meeting, but we can address them as staff outside the meeting. So we'll give you some contact information if you have particular questions about your property. Okay. So let's transfer to the Q&A. Andre or Ethan, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I can start. The first question, we have one in the chat. This might be good to clear up. When you say agency referral, what is it that you're referring to?
Good question. The draft, in addition to being put out for sort of general public comment, has been sent to agencies that provide services in the area, county departments that provide expertise, and may have some advice for us as we draft these regulations. So the water district, the State Division of Water Resources, to see if they have comments about how this might impact well permitting, the service providers like Xcel Energy, adjacent cities and towns. I'm trying to remember who else was on that list, but in general, it's our kind of subject matter experts that we have on hand to provide information and guidance as we adopt code changes. The slide deck will be available on the docket website along with this recording as soon as we're finished here today. I think Rick should be able to post it relatively shortly. The draft regulations are there as well.
And Hannah, we have another question in the chat asking about applying for ADU permits prior to the Board of Commissioners hearing, asking if it would be possible to convert a temporary dwelling into an ADU after the adopted regulations.
Okay, so let's tackle the first one first. Until these regulations are adopted, we can't take building permit applications for them. So we do need to wait until after they're adopted for that. And then if you have a temporary dwelling that has met the parameters that are eventually adopted, it could be converted to kind of a permanent accessory dwelling.
Hi, Hannah. This is Rick Hackett with CPMP staff. I see some folks have raised their hands to ask questions, so I will allow them to unmute. Susan, you can unmute yourself and ask your question now if you'd like, and then we'll be followed by Eve after that, if that works for you, Hannah.
Sure, thanks, Rick. For some reason, I can't see the participants. It's a little unnerving. Go ahead, Susan.
Sorry, I don't know how my hand got raised, but I'm actually just listening. I don't have a question.
Great. Thank you. I think Eve was next. Eve, you've been unmuted.
Oh yeah, maybe it's already talked about. I just walked away for a second. Just wondering, would the ADU permitted to have its own utilities? I guess most time if it's attached, it's just on one utility, and I don't know, how's that being handled? It will be handled.
Yeah. So the county is not a utility service provider. So the land use code doesn't generally address that. It really, I think, is up to who does provide the utilities. But it is a good point that when we consider the construction of an accessory dwelling and how far away it might be from the house, questions about how far utility lines need to be run, if a septic system can be shared, start to come up. So that sort of the further away from the primary house and maybe the existing septic system, the more likely that accessory dwelling would have to have perhaps its own septic system, a more extensive driveway, and utilities run out to it.
So right now, there's no preference of it's allowed or it's not. It's kind of gonna evolve.
I didn't understand that question. I'm sorry.
So it sounds like right now there's no preference or decisions that if the ADU is allowed to have its totally separate utilities. Like, you have separate electricity. Most of us here has well, but if you have a separate electricity meter, it surely will make like a rental unit more convenient.
So
I'm just,
you are correct. The regulations don't speak to that issue. The draft that we have proposed at this point. Thank you, Eve. Do we have any other hands raised?
Hey, Hannah, I don't see any other hands raised at the moment. Never mind. Ellen just raised her hand.
Hi, Ellen, you're unmuted. Ellen, are you with us?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. If an ADU is being attached to, for example, an accessory structure like a barn or a garage or something like that, and there are so many new building code regulations for fire resistance and Energy Star and things like that, will those regulations apply to the entire structure or just the ADU portion of the structure? For example, if a residential building has to meet all of these Energy Star type codes now in fire resistance, does that mean that your entire barn or garage workshop space or something like that would be subject to those residential requirements?
So we have not contemplated changing the building code in any way to accommodate these. I do think it's maybe a little trickier of a question if you're attaching the accessory dwelling to, say, a barn, rather than, in this case, the garage. But at this point in time, we have not proposed any changes to the building code as it is currently applied.
Okay, it's just trying to understand because we had a big agricultural barn and we were thinking to put an apartment in the barn. And so trying to understand what the requirements are for the entire structure to make sure that the one apartment is okay.
Yeah, Ellen, we might need to dive into that one in more detail. To be honest, I don't know how to answer your question right this minute.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any other questions out of the Q&A that we haven't addressed? Oh, I see Carl has a hand up.
Hi, yes. Can you hear me?
I can, thank you.
With the general shortage of housing in Boulder County, why are the ADU changes restricted just to the Marshall Fire area?
That's a good question. Really, it's a matter of timing. We do intend to take up the accessory dwelling question on a countywide basis. It was decided to move forward with this more narrow scope because we heard from the Marshall Fire folks that being able to plan for rebuilding and maybe living in the accessory dwelling while they're rebuilding the home, if we waited a year or two until we have a comprehensive accessory dwelling code change done, wouldn't be able to help them in any way. So it really boils down to timing.
You anticipate having a code change fairly soon to the general Boulder County code?
Yes,
Okay, well, thank you.
Sure.
Hannah,
Yeah.
we do have a question in the chat. This might be a good one for the group, asking for clarity on the change for the residential floor area requirement for this accessory dwelling update. In other words, requiring ADUs to be considered part of the residential floor area.
Yeah, I mean, at this time, the way we're addressing them in Article 19, you know, there is not a review, kind of a use review process for these. So the residential floor area and the established sort of size parameters are what's the general anticipated level of development on these sites at this time. So allowing the accessory dwellings to be permitted in an expedited way without, for example, our current limited impact special review process, considering them residential floor area would allow us to forego that limited impact special use process and presume the outcome is going to be a compatible level of development. It's a good question too. I don't know that I can see all the participants. Do we have any other hands?
Hi, Hannah. This is Rick Hackett from staff. Susan McMinn, I see your hand is raised. You can unmute if you have a question.
Okay, yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks for taking our question. I had seen this question a few times in the Q&A on the chat and wanted to surface it for discussion. There's a pretty drastic reduction in the size of the allowable ADU in terms of square footage down to 700 square feet. Couple of questions around that is, first of all, why is there not consideration for the size of the lot relative to the size of the ADU? And secondly, at 700 square feet, that doesn't do much to serve a family trying to live in it during the rebuild of the primary dwelling. It's not large enough to be a one-bedroom apartment later, and wondering whether that was considered as well.
The size that's proposed is consistent with what's in the land use code now for a family care unit. It's again an allowable, it's a floor area that, you know, when placed on the property in many places, you know, might not have significant additional land use impacts. The size of the lot is a question that we get often when we try to draft regulations in Boulder County. And to a large extent, what it boils down to is the size of the lot may offer you maybe more places to build, but that's not always true. And often the larger lots might have more resources of concern or the potential to construct development that has impacts on others. You know, if it's, you know, if you've got a larger lot and you place the house in the middle, kind of looking at who your neighbors are and what those view impacts are, those are the kinds of things that we typically look at through site plan review. You know, it's challenging to write a one size fits all set of regulations for Boulder County just because our topography is so different and varied, and often the size of the lot doesn't relate necessarily to its development potential or the ability to minimize the impacts of development.
Hey, Hannah, there was another question in the chat about the Article 19 ADU rules being available for homes that are damaged but not completely destroyed.
Yes, the scope of the proposal right now does focus on those whose homes were destroyed. Again, part of the rationale for kind of this hurried code update, more expedited code update process was really to help facilitate those folks who are rebuilding their primary home to incorporate the outcome of these regulations in those plans. There a lot of the reasons that folks really want or may need an accessory dwelling apply countywide, and that coming code update to address that in more detail is forthcoming. So this first phase and this first segment really tried to focus on those who have the most significant impact from the fire and really might need these regulations in place sooner rather than later while they contemplate rebuilding their home.
Hannah, we have another question in the chat asking about the height limits for ADUs. Would you mind going over those again and what height limits apply to which of the permutations?
Sure, great question. Let me find the correct slide. So there is only one of the types that has a height limit specific to it, and that is the detached structure. Has a height limit of 20 feet. The rest of the types, which are the attached structure to the principal or attached to the accessory structure, would be subject to the height limitations in the zone district. So there isn't a special height limitation for those.
Hi, Hannah.
Hi.
This is Molly McCrae. I got permission to unmute here. I'd like to ask about, I'm going to go back to that size limitation and lot size, where, I get code has to be kind of a one size fits all, but I think what we really know about Boulder County is that it's a lot more diverse in lot size, social equity, all kinds of things, and restrictive residential square footage, which varies widely from Marshall to Wildflower to Spanish Hills and down in Superior. It's so wide of a variance between lot sizes and house sizes. Is there room to make it, I guess, easier or less restrictive if the general regulations says 700 square feet, that you could go up to 1,200 if you're willing to do an SPR or go through another process? Because it just feels like a one size fits all regulation here. It leaves it helpful for some. And when they talk about 700 square feet as the family care unit, that's not meant for a family. That's meant for aging parents or a brother you're caring for. There's all kinds of reasons to have a family care unit, but it's not a feasible solution to have a family of four in an ADU while we're trying, or in a 700 square foot ADU while we're trying to rebuild. Just wondering what room there could be made to to increase the size, even if it makes another step in the process.
Well, as I mentioned, the regulations aren't final, Molly, and sort of this type of feedback is exactly what we're hoping to hear from you and comment. So I guess my response is there's always room for these things to change because they're not set in stone right this moment.
Okay, thank you. I'll make comments.
Robin.
It's actually PJ. Robin's my wife, but I'm on her account. I just want to back up what Molly said and actually what Susan said. We have a family of 4. We're looking for somewhere where we can stay while we rebuild, and 700 square feet is just completely infeasible. I think I understand the difficulty in forging these things, but we're already bumping into presumptive size max problems. And just with our old house. And then we had a 880 square foot detached shop that I was intending to try and convert to an ADU. If this turns into a 700 foot limit, this really renders this whole exercise pointless for us. And I just wanted to voice that. I'm going to put that in comments as well.
Thank you. Yeah, let's go back just for a quick second. I do, part of the reason I tried to keep this conversation today focused on questions is because we really do want your comments in writing. Having your comments in writing allows us to share them with others like the Planning Commission and the Board of County Commissioners. I appreciate hearing what you're saying today, but it would, if you want them considered on a broader scale, it's really helpful to email me some comments. And the email for this is planner@bouldercounty.org. Okay. Well, if we want to give folks a few more minutes for we have quite a bit of time, like I said, but if there aren't any more comments, we also can sign off early for questions, I guess.
Hi, Hannah. This is Rick Hackett. There was one comment, one question in the Q&A, which might some folks would like to hear the answer to. How is the height measured? What if a structure isn't on a flat grade? Their proposal would be built into a hillside, so they're curious about how the height is measured when it comes to new structures.
Yes, the way height is measured in Boulder County is from existing grade. So how I usually describe this is if you have a flat site, if you have a perfectly flat site, then your height limit is going to be a line 30 feet up and parallel to that flat site. If your site is on a hill, then your 30-foot height limit line is again going to be parallel to that slope. So your building really needs to kind of step up the slope in order to keep under that 30-foot height limit. Another way to think about it is if you can imagine, again, the slope of your property and then a parallel kind of ceiling above that, that would be your height limit, and the building needs to be designed within that space. Someone had asked a question about referral agencies earlier, and one I failed to mention was school district. you know, additional homes, additional larger homes, you know, have the potential impact to generate additional demands on those kinds of services as well. So we would expect to get those sorts of comments back from the school district. Again, if the accessory dwelling is something large enough to house a family of 4, and then we have a second principal dwelling, we have sort of double the transportation impacts. So there are some reasons that size limits help. That's what, you know, a couple of reasons why size limits help minimize kind of additional impacts rolling on into the future or hitting other agencies that have obligations to provide service.
Hey, Hannah, there was another question in the chat about whether or not the requirement of being within 50 feet of the main house footprint to avoid site plan review only applies to the accessory structure within accessory dwelling or to all accessory structures.
As it's drafted, it's what we're talking about here today is the accessory structure with an accessory dwelling. If you're, you know, not contemplating an accessory dwelling at all, but you, as part of your redevelopment plans, Article 19 currently requires that those be located in the same general area as the development that pre-existed the fire.
And there was another question about size limits. If someone wants a larger unit and chooses to go through a longer site plan review process, does that increase the size limit of the accessory dwelling or potential size limit, I suppose?
You know, I don't know how that would shake out at this point. It's, you know, certainly taking a different look or a deeper planning review look at something that's larger, you know, is an option. I don't have I can't really respond to that question right this minute because we don't have it. The draft isn't written that way. You know, if you have, again, suggestions or ideas, you know, please send them to me.
Hi, Hannah, it's Molly again. Is there the opportunity or possibility to have a in-person forum? Or I know a lot of us are going to send in a lot of comments, which is great because it gives us time to really think through our thoughts and word them, and take a look at the draft code to see what we're referencing. But I think a frustration that multiple people feel is that there's no feedback to our comments. You know, most of us attended the last ADU meeting and put a lot of input in, answered all the surveys, thought that we were contributing to what would be discussed. And maybe it was, we don't know. We're not in that story. And we don't have the opportunity, other than typing in some comments, to have our voices heard directly to the people writing these regulations, making these decisions. Could there be consideration of a roundtable, a forum, something where we'd have a better opportunity to kind of discuss this as opposed to just sending in comments and hoping they're considered?
Well, I mean, I do think the regulations as drafted reflect a lot of what was heard. You know, the proposal removes the limited impact special review process. It allows it through a pretty simple building permit review for a lot of what we heard people wanted. You know, I am pretty sure that this draft does not provide everybody what they specifically voiced. You know, and the process for this code update, you know, was much too long for a lot of people. You know, in order for this to be useful to most people, or you know, to a lot of the folks that we've heard from, they want it done already. Pausing to do what you're asking, I think, would push out our time frame a lot longer. You know, it's not, certainly not perfect in a short time frame like this. It doesn't provide a lot of opportunity for back and forth.
Right, and totally understandable that trying to expedite and meet all the needs is a very delicate balance. And we do appreciate that you guys are taking the time to work through this and help out. But I think I feel like for us and for the people I've talked to, is it still has a significant impact on families. It gets a couple back home to their property, a single person back home to their property. But I know I would be willing to delay it further, and don't everybody else kill me for saying that, to meet the actual needs that or at least broaden the scope. And maybe there's room to go forward with the restrictive measures, and exactly as you put forth in the presentation, but allowing maybe a longer time limit. And if you want more space, if you need more space, if that's too restrictive to be beneficial, that there's room for further discussion about what those limits might be to make it not impact your neighborhood and go out of character. I know it's another step for you guys.
One thing I do want to point out, and you know, for those folks who are wanting to build a home first before their principal dwelling, I really think that you should reach out to your rebuilding coordinators, and we should talk about those instances specifically, because there is a temporary housing component already in Article 19 that might better suit those needs.
I thought that temporary housing was only 500 square feet in Article 19.
I don't have that in front of me right this minute.
Now, if I can add that 500 to my 700, it's a good answer.
Yeah, thanks, Molly. We have another hand up. If we could switch to Judy.
Hi, my name's Judy Demarest, and I'm just kind of curious. I live in Marshall, and our properties are so unique down here, you know, in terms of setback and close to the ditch and creek, and there's just so many issues that are unique to each property. I'm just kind of wondering how many properties in unincorporated Boulder County have been affected, and would it be that hard to send like the building coordinator out and discuss each property with a unique solution rather than try to make one size fits all for, I just don't know how many houses you're having to deal with, but we're not talking about the thousands in Superior, Louisville, it's just unincorporated Boulder County. And as I think Molly pointed out, every property is so different, you know, from, 35 acres to, 500 square foot lot. So I'm just curious why we have to do a one size fits all.
Well, land use regulations their adopted law. They need to apply equitably to all people. We really can't sort of just make things up as we go along for each property owner. What you're talking about, having a planner come out and do sort of a site-specific detailed review results in, if we were going to do that and we would take that approach, we still need some parameters about how can this be approved and what are the conditions for something to be approved that again apply to everybody and are fair that way and result in a consistent outcome for folks, and so that people can expect a reasonable outcome. If we were going to do kind of a more general set of guidelines with sort of a detailed site analysis, that gets us away from what's proposed in the regulations, which is a pretty straightforward right to building permit approach. So what we had really heard from folks, earlier on is that they wanted this to be simple. They wanted it to be straightforward and really only kind of the most potentially impactful ones evaluated on that more detailed basis and provided notice to adjacent property owners.
Okay, I'm kind of naive about it, but it just seems to me, just in the few neighbors I've talked to, we've had some neighborhood meetings. Everybody has different issues and different sizes and different parameters. And it just seems when we say, well, we'll make one size, and I guess it's easier for you guys in planning, but I certainly wouldn't feel, upset if my neighbor got something more than I did just because they had a bigger lot or had a bigger family. It just seems that seems more equitable than one size fits all. But maybe that's too complicated for you guys. I just thought I'd throw it out there.
Well, we appreciate your comments. Thanks, Judy.
Okay.
Any other questions out there? Oh, Judy, did you have another comment?
Oh, no, I tried to lower my hand. I'm sorry.
That's all right. I do it all the time.
And Hannah, this is Rick Hackett with staff. There was one question in the Q&A you want to address. Bonnie Smith asked about kind of non-traditional solutions, like some prefabs or there's a site called Boxable. Can you just mention how structures, what they need to meet as far as building code, if it's a kind of a non-traditional type of construction?
I hope you're not asking me to quote the building code, but the land use code that we're talking about right now is, the zoning basis. It kind of says you can do this thing here, and maybe you can do this thing, and here's where it needs to go and how big it needs to be. It does not tell you how things can be or need to be constructed. That is the role of our building code. So if a solution that someone wants is able to meet our building code, then it can be approved.
Thank you, Hannah.
Okay. Got crickets out there. Does anybody have anything else they'd like to ask at this time?
Hello, this is Ellen again.
Hi, Alan.
My intention is just to know whether the allowance of ADUs is to support additional formal affordable housing in Boulder, and if that affordable housing is intended to be for like single people, or if it's intended to allow families or underprivileged people or something like that. What is the intention around allowing ADUs? And this does relate, of course, to the square footage.
I mean, it does directly relate to square footage. You know, the bigger the unit, the less affordable it is. You know, I had talked to Nori at Housing and Human Services, and, you know, part of that conversation was that small units are hard to come by in Boulder County. The apartment style builders don't build small studios. And so I do think part of some of the rationale for keeping these small is that in order to adopt a code amendment, again, there are criteria for that we use to make recommendations to the Board of County Commissioners. And one of them is that the proposed code change is in conformance with the adopted comprehensive plan. We did adopt a modification to the housing element recently that spoke to allowing accessory dwellings in these kind of limited additional dwelling units in the county as a way to help address our affordable housing issue. You know, building a 1,500 or 1,200 square foot house doesn't help contribute to affordability in the same way that maybe a smaller unit would be. Who they may be rented to is, again, not something that's regulated by the land use code. Someone could build one of these and never rent it. They could rent it then to, you know, if they decided to rent it, that would be up to the property owner. So it doesn't require that they would be rented. It doesn't require that they be rented at a certain rate or to a certain type of person.
Thank you for explaining your thoughts on affordability. It's just that, you know, there's not even very many children going to the entire Mesa Elementary School District. And so it would be nice if we were able to have more families in our part of the burn area.
Okay, folks. Well, if we don't have any more questions, I think we can sign off for the evening. If questions do pop into your head later, again, feel free to email us at planner@bouldercounty.org, and we will try and answer those that way as well. I'm going to leave the meeting at this point in time, and you all are welcome to do the same.
Thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Thanks for joining us.